You didn't grow up with a financial advisor in the family. You grew up with a parent who clipped coupons on Sunday mornings, who turned the lights off every single time you left a room, who said, "We'll see," instead of "yes." Not because they didn't love you, but because the money wasn't always there, and neither was the safety net. You were raised by Generation X, the latchkey kids who became your parents, the generation that got handed a world mid-collapse and just figured it out. No handbook, no helicopter, just grit, a second job, and a whole lot of quiet sacrifice. And here's the thing nobody is saying out loud. The financial habits they wired into you, the ones you've been low-key embarrassed about, the ones you've been calling anxiety or cheapness or scarcity mindset, most people would pay thousands of dollars in coaching to actually have them. But you've been treating them like damage. And I need you to sit with that for a second, because that ends today. Let's talk about what's actually happening inside your brain when money comes up. There's a concept in psychology called embodied financial cognition, which is just a fancy way of saying your relationship with money lives in your body, not just your mind. It was shaped before you had the vocabulary to describe it, before you even had a bank account. Every time your Gen X parent said, "That's not in the budget," or made you put something back on the shelf, or sat at that kitchen table with bills spread out and a look on their face they thought you didn't notice, your nervous system took notes. And your default mode network, that's the part of your brain that runs in the background, the one narrating your life and quietly building your identity. It filed every single one of those moments under "this is who we are." Think of your default mode network like the algorithm running your inner monologue. It's always on, always updating. And Gen X parents, they were constantly feeding it data about resourcefulness, creative problem solving, and doing more with less. You didn't choose that curriculum, but you graduated from it whether you knew it or not. There's a third idea I want you to hold on to, and it's called adaptive competence. It's the psychological term for when a coping mechanism becomes so effective, so practiced, that it stops being just a survival response and becomes a genuine transferable skill. Like a kid who learned to cook because both parents worked double shifts and grew up to be someone who can make a 5-star meal from whatever's left in the fridge on a Thursday night. That's not deprivation. That's mastery born from necessity. That's you, with money. What felt like childhood constraint was actually a masterclass in financial resilience, and it's time you started treating it that way. But I have to be honest with you first, because it's not all clean and empowering, is it? There's grief here too, a kind of invisible grief that financial influencers and financial content completely skip over. Carl Jung said, "We don't become conscious of the light without first sitting in the darkness." And for a lot of people raised by Gen X parents, there was darkness. Maybe it was watching a parent stress about rent in a way they tried to hide but couldn't quite manage. Maybe it was understanding, way too young, that your family was one bad month away from real trouble. Maybe it was the emotional distance that came wrapped in financial provision. "I'm working this hard because I love you," and you learned to accept that translation because it was the one available to you. What part of your childhood carefree life did you have to trade away to become financially aware so early? That question deserves to sit, because some of you grew up fast, not because anyone asked you to out loud, but because the household energy required it. And that kind of early maturity leaves a mark. It can make abundance feel suspicious. It can make you feel guilty for wanting more than your parents had. It can turn you into a brilliant saver who cannot spend on themselves without a shame spiral pulling them underwater. The habit isn't the problem. The wound underneath the habit is worth looking at. But here's where we turn the corner, because those habits, healed and conscious, are genuinely extraordinary. You might find yourself doing these 5 things without realizing how rare they actually are. First, you instinctively know the difference between a want and a need, not because you're cold or joyless, but because you were trained. While other people are impulse buying and waking up with regret, you pause. That pause is worth thousands of dollars over the lifetime. That pause is discipline most adults are actively, desperately trying to build from scratch. Second, you can live below your means without feeling deprived. Your Gen X upbringing recalibrated your baseline. You don't need the biggest apartment or the newest phone to feel okay in your own skin. That psychological flexibility is financial freedom in its most portable, unbreakable form. Third, you negotiate, and you do it naturally. You watched a parent turn a no into a maybe at the mechanics counter, in the landlord's office, at the checkout line. You absorbed deep in your bones that almost nothing is truly fixed price when you're calm and resourceful. Most people are genuinely terrified to negotiate. You just do it. Fourth, you have a rainy day instinct that never fully switches off. Something in you always keeps a buffer. Even when money feels good, you don't completely exhale. Some people call that anxiety. I call it strategic foresight. And channeled with intention, it's the habit that quietly prevents financial catastrophe over and over again. Fifth, and this is the big one, you can problem solve inside financial scarcity without fully unraveling. When an unexpected bill lands, you don't spiral into paralysis. You move, you list options, you make calls, you figure it out. That is not normal. That is a crisis management skill that took your parent years of hard, unglamorous living to build, and you inherited it before you were old enough to drive. But here's the twist. You weren't born this way. You were forged this way. And what was forged under pressure can be refined with intention. So where do you actually go from here? First, acknowledge the full picture. These habits came with a cost, and that cost deserves to be named. Maybe in a journal, maybe in therapy, maybe just in a quiet, honest moment with yourself on a Tuesday night. The goal isn't to erase what Gen X installed in you. The goal is to carry it consciously, not compulsively. Second, give yourself permission to expand. The scarcity instinct that protected you doesn't have to be the ceiling of your financial life. You can be a brilliant saver and a generous spender. You can keep the rainy day fund and book the trip without 3 days of guilt on the other side. These are not contradictions, they are the upgrade. Third, reframe the inheritance. That worn wallet, those clipped coupons, that parent who said, "We'll see," with a face you could never quite read. They were doing something profound. They were modeling survival with dignity. That's what they handed you, wrapped in imperfect, overworked, doing their best human hands. And now you get to hand something better to whoever comes next. Your kids, your community, your future self. You aren't broken. You're just adapted. And adaptation that becomes conscious, that's not a wound anymore. That's a foundation.